much. Thank you for the introduction, Julia. Yes, you're quite right. I've worked at the University of South Wales, that's UoSW, for far too long. And over those 22 years, I've got to know quite a few people in this room. So it's really nice to be here today and to see all your faces. Yes, I've been involved in lots of drugs research. So yeah, thanks for the invitation. And what a brilliant day so far. I mean, I've just enjoyed every single talk. It's been so interesting. I've learned such a lot. So yeah, last but hopefully not least. So I'm Katy from the University of South Wales, and this is Dom. So Dom Maddox is going to share the stage with me. I'm going to try not to talk for too long. So we're going to have a bit of a tag team effort here. But yeah, I think we should recognise Dom is a second year psychology student, an undergrad, and he's being brave and coming here to speak to you all today. Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to flag up the strap line for this conference talks about transforming the narrative, and I'm going to be talking to you about the High House, and really what we hope the High House is going to do is transform the way that universities respond to student drug use. Oh, going backwards. Oh, I got the wrong one. Okay, brilliant, thank you. So I'll just go. Okay, yeah, so we've got 25 minutes slot. And I'm going to start off by giving a bit of background to what the High House is and why we've developed it and the process of developing it. And then Dom's going to take over and talk about the actual practical reality of building the High House and delivering it in action. We'll then obviously take any questions at the end, although I think that's going to end up being part of the panel session. Okay, so I'm sure you're all wondering, what is the High House then? Well, the High House is a peer-led project, and by peer-led, I'm talking about students, university students. So it's being led by university students. And it's a project that involves providing information, advice, support, signposting, help and information to students. So it's help and information, so that's where the High comes from, the H and the I. And this was a brand or a name that was actually developed by our peers, our students, and Dom's going to talk a bit about that later on. So it is specifically targeting students, and this could be students with their own problems or queries about drug use, or it could be students asking about their friends or family members. But there's no reason why staff at the universities can't get involved with the High House and speak to the peers about any issues. They might have students that they're concerned about, or they might have their own problems, or they might have their families and friends that they want to seek advice for. So whilst it is specifically for students, we're not ruling out staff as well. Now, importantly, the High House project is a partnership. So it's bringing together criminology and psychology staff and students. We've got student services within the university, and the student services department is concerned with the health and well-being and welfare of students. It's also a partnership with the Students' Union, so this is an external organisation that's run by students. It's a collective voice for students. So the Students' Union are involved, and importantly, it's also with the hosts of today's conference, with Barod, that are providing the specialist substance misuse expertise and treatment and support. Okay. So the next question then to think about is, well, why have we decided that the High House is something important to do? Why is it being developed? So the idea for it actually emerged out of some research I did coming up to about 10 years ago, and it was called the HEADS project, and that was the Higher Education Alcohol and Drug Survey. So 10 years or so ago, there was very little interest, political, research-wise, or any otherwise, interest in issues around student drug use, and most of what was known had come out of the United States of America. So there was quite a lot of US-based research, and this was suggesting that university students were more likely to use drugs than their non-university counterparts. So there was a higher prevalence rate of drug use among students than non-students. So the Higher Education Alcohol and Drug Survey, so this HEADS project, was really our attempt to see whether or not the same situation was occurring in the UK, or Wales more specifically. So we decided we'd do a big online survey. We'd try and get all the universities in Wales on board. So we contacted all the universities, and there were 9. And we were amazed to find that 8 of those 9 universities agreed to take part. So they were actually willing to take part in the research. We were a bit surprised because we thought that they would probably just want to bury their heads in the sand and not explore issues of drug use among students. But yeah, so we were really pleased. We had 8 of the 9, and then in practice 7 of the universities agreed to take part in the way that we wanted, and that involved sending out an email with a link to our survey in it to all of their students. So that was over 100,000 students got an email. So of that 100,000, we had nearly 8,000 responses. So not a huge response rate, but this generated a large number of responses to our survey, and that's actually the largest UK survey of students to date. So what did we find? Well, we found that most students had used alcohol in the last year, but most had not used drugs. But what we did find was that the students who responded to our survey were more likely to have used drugs than people in the general population. So there was a higher prevalence rate. So it was really replicating what the surveys in America had found. So you might think, well, why are students at this elevated risk of drug use and, of course, then associated harms? Well, the age at which people typically start university is 18 to 25, so this is a time of emerging adulthood. They're moving away from home, often for the first time, away from informal social controls of their parents, and they're entering what you might call a risk environment, so they're exposed to more factors that might encourage drug use. So there may be greater opportunities to use drugs, there may be greater availability than where they were living before. They've got increased study pressures, so they might need to use substances to help them cope, and there may be more peer pressure as well. So these are some of the explanations for why students might be at an increased risk. So running alongside the survey, we also had a longitudinal study where our goal was to follow through a sample of students through their time at university. So we would interview them in their consecutive years. Now COVID messed this up a bit, but we did manage a couple of years of data collection, and we heard stories of very long waiting lists for support, so they couldn't access the university-based services, so they weren't getting the help through the university. They were also talked about reluctance to engage with services because they were fearful of the repercussions of exposing, reporting drug use to the university, because they thought they might get some kind of punishment and be expelled from their courses even. So they were fearful of those repercussions. So at that time we lobbied the university on the basis of those findings. Caroline and I went and met with them, didn't we? Trying to get them to change the narrative, to introduce a service that would help support students. But at that time there wasn't much appetite for change. But fortunately since that time there has been a real shift, and there's an increasing research, media and political attention to the subject. So media attention has very sadly been attracted by some very sad stories of students dying on university campuses. So there's a few examples of stories there. And these also attracted political attention. We also had the Dame Carol Black review, which highlighted an increase in illegal drug use, or so-called recreational drug use among young people. So things are starting to change, and there was much more attention given to the issue of student drug use. So you might think, well, what are the universities actually doing about this? How are they responding? And you might be forgiven for thinking there's a nice coordinated approach across all the universities in the UK. But actually, the situation couldn't be further from that. The universities differ enormously. We have some universities that are adopting a very punitive, zero-tolerance approach, where students might be expelled from their accommodation, they might even be expelled from their courses, they might get huge fines. Now there's a Professor Nick Beach, who is actually the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Middlesex. He's also the chair of the UUK Drugs Task Force. He talks about how a zero-tolerance approach is just really not going to work. He talks about how, for just about the whole of human history, people have been using drugs. So it seems pretty unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to isolate universities from this. And why would you want to? It's not really desirable, because we want universities to be part of our societies. And also those draconian measures and messages just serve to close down the dialogue, stop people talking, stop people seeking help, stop people from talking to one another about their problems and getting peer support that way. But fortunately, there are some universities who have adopted a harm reduction approach. There's a couple of universities in Bristol that are going so far as to provide drug testing kits. They're linking in with their local services, basically providing a harm reduction philosophy and support system to university students. And it's just showing that it's okay to do that universities don't need to fear for their reputational damage, that the harm reduction approach can work. And I've mentioned in the middle of that slide there that there's a task force that's been specifically set up by Universities UK, and this is brings together 140 universities across the UK, and they're exploring ways of bringing universities together to develop a much more coordinated approach. So I mentioned before about peers, right? So peers are at the heart of this project, and Dom's going to talk to you a bit about that. And the motivating factor for having peers lead this project at UoSW is motivated by a couple of things. So first of all, we know that there's increasing involvement of peers in the drugs field. We know that we have peers who are drugs workers, and we have peers involved in research projects too. And we've had some really exciting research projects very recently, for example, the evaluation of Buvidal and also the lessons learned from COVID-19 project. So yeah, getting peers involved in research is really important and useful. So the basic premise of the peer approach then is that peers have often greater credibility than others, so that their shared experience of the world, the same world of the people that they're helping, really allows their messages to be heard. So for university students, being able to talk to other university students with shared understanding of university life is really valuable. It was also influenced by some really exciting work going on in my university, in our Centre for Criminology. We had some new projects that involved students volunteering and working with external organisations. And we had something called the Cold Case Unit and the Innocence Project. And this involved students working to help solve cold cases and help resolve miscarriages of justice. So this was really exciting stuff, and the students were loving it. And so I thought, well, perhaps we can do something similar for the drugs field. And hence the High House idea was born. And we also have this very important and strong and long relationship with Barod. And Barod delivers services in the area where the university is based, so it just made sense for us to partner on this. And it's supported by strategy. The current UK strategy talks about bringing universities and services together. Oh, gone too far. So how has the High House been developed? So I'm just going to whiz through this very quickly because I know Dom's going to talk in more depth. But we had to develop a proposal, we had to get approvals at all the different levels in the university, we had to do various assessments, equality, diversity and inclusivity, data protection, and we had to recruit our peers, which we did through our online information sharing system called Blackboard. And we then had the fabulous trainers. Lisa and Lou, you still here? Yay! Woo, woo, woo! They delivered 3 days of intensive training to our peers, and Sarah as well. Sorry, your name's not on there, but yeah. So brilliant training of the peers. And the peers worked together to develop a brand, which is the High House, the name, and also publicity materials. And we also needed a venue. So where are the peers going to be based? And I think at this point I'll hand over to you. Okay, thank you.
Bring up the notes on here. So. Cool. So thanks for that, Katy. You see, Katy has done like all of the work, all the policy, all the research. Me and the rest of the guys just sort of came up with a name and pretty colours and pictures and that sort of stuff. Building a high house, I'm going to talk to you about how we went about developing it, the things we're doing right now, and what our goals are for the future. So first, like Katy said, we received some fantastic training from the partners at Barod, talking us through the substances that seems to be circulating at the moment. That was also looking at how people are going about acquiring them, which was quite eye-opening for some of us. Back in my day when you were sort of like going out and getting stuff, there was the whole formality of going to a dealer's house, sitting there, having a chat before you could go, and it was quite surprising to learn that now it's basically like Uber Eats. You just go on your phone, click a button, order what you want, and 20 minutes later it's arriving at your door. So it's really important for us as the students that are going to be a part of this to understand how the sort of current climate is, and the processes that people might be going through to acquire these substances. Next, we went on to the logo design. This was something that took quite a while to come up with. Because it's a student-led project and it's at the university, we didn't want anything that was too sort of like clinical or just gave it the sort of wrong vibe, if you will. We wanted something that was like friendly and approachable. You wanted a service that would be like talking to your friend about something that's bothering you, not going to see a university head. That's the idea that we were aiming for. From there, we went on to talk about how we wanted our sort of personality to be with the high house. And we came up with a few key points that resonated with all of us, and what we really try and focus on. So the first one is making it a non-judgmental space. So we want people to feel comfortable to come and talk to us about whatever issues they may be facing. We don't see them as the drug that they're taking or the problem that they have. We see them as people that are coming to have a chat or might be asking for some help, and that's the most important thing. This resonates with me quite a lot. I suffered with alcoholism for about 2 years, and I had friends and family saying, we're worried about you, you've got a problem, and I sort of put my head in the sand. And I think a lot of that was to do with the sort of the worry and the shame that comes with the stigma of having to depend on a substance to get you through the day. So that's something I'm very passionate about making it that safe, non-judgmental space. The second one is it being peer-led. Like Kate was saying, people feel more comfortable talking to somebody that's similar. And in the university environment, a lot of people might be moving out of home for the first time, going through academic studies that they've never done before. All these stresses and the environment that we're in, living in halls, for instance, is an experience. So just having that ability to, share with each other the experiences that we're going through helps create those connections and bonds. So the next one is focusing on harm reduction. So we believe the key to helping people is it's not to like punish people or say oh no, you're not allowed to do that, because we're of the mindset that people are people. You should be able to make your own choices and do what you want with yourself, your body, your lives, and that's really important to us. But if people are gonna use stuff, we want them to be as safe as possible. So we want to provide as much knowledge and education as possible. Not just people hearing what their friend has said and taking it as gospel. We want to provide them with the facts that have been researched and shown. So the next, support. So we want to offer a variety of support routes. This can take the form of people just coming down and having a chat with us. If they've seen something, maybe people in halls sniffing some white powder on the countertop and they're, never seen that before and they want to know a bit more about that. Maybe they were out on a night out and somebody offered them some pills and, it was like, oh, this is, ecstasy, for example, and they wanted to come and get some more information about it. that's something we can offer. As Katie said, we were also partnered with the different members of the university, such as the welfare team, which has offered us to send students to like stress management. So if we feel, for instance, if somebody comes in and they're smoking a lot more than they used to because they're stressing about exams, then rather than, if they're asking for help, rather than just going down the drug route, you look at the actual problem, which is the stress about the exam. So that's when we can signpost them to the stress management facilities at the university. Again, obviously it's all at the student's choice. We just offer the things and then they pick what they feel would be best for them, because again, it's their lives, they know what works for them and what would help. And the final point is it's confidential. So while we operate in the student union and we get funding from the SU and obviously involved with faculty members, everything that is discussed and shared with us in the High House is kept confidential. While we might take sort of information about what problems are coming, so we can tailor our service to what the needs are that we're seeing are prevalent, no identifiable information is collected. We don't tell any of the university staff or anything like that about the people that came and see us, because we don't want people worrying about coming to, if they've got something in their rooms or they're using something that they might be struggling with, if they come and talk to us and all of a sudden they're having their room kicked in and they're getting kicked off a campus. That's not what we want. We want to help people, not punish people.